Welcome to Life on the Rocks, your innovative entrepreneurship and motivational based show where we ask the real questions by tapping into the minds of successful, high-performing individuals. I'm going to predicate to you that luck is an illusion, disproving the myth that there's a such thing as an overnight success. Get ready and strap in 3, 2, 1.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are coming at you live from episode 73 of Life on the Rocks with your host, Connor Rocques. Today's featured guest in the hot seat is Mr. John Proctor. How are you today, John?
Good. How are you doing, Connor?
Oh, I'm doing great. For anybody who doesn't know John, he is the CEO of Martello Technologies. They are a leading provider of network performance management solutions for unified communications. He served in the military for over 20 years in both the Canadian and the British forces. He's a TEDx speaker, and it's also important to know he's also a cybersecurity expert. The first question I want to ask to build some context for the audience, John, I see that you went from being a veteran to a CEO, so super important. What got you started in the military, my friend?
Well, I think a number of reasons. None of my sort of my cousins are all similar. Sort of looked at it. My grandfather had served, and then realizing I wasn't the world's greatest academic. I wasn't going to be the world's greatest scientist. You've got to find your own path. So when I left school, recognizing I wasn't going to be a rock star academic, I'd looked at a number of things, but I really liked sort of the idea of serving. At that age, you're looking for that adventure. Call it the wanderlust. To go and see new things, and really sort of, I'd always been a team sports player, so it seemed to be a good fit for me, and turned out it was right.
How was it done? So I remember you talking in your TED talk about you went from jumping out of airplanes to then all of a sudden being the CEO of a big company. How was the transition for you? Like, how did it end up after you retired from the military? Did you become appointed as the CEO to Martello Technologies?
No, and the transition's hard. It's a very different culture. You make the move from being sort of ingrained in this military environment and stepping out, so that's not easy. And I think being able to understand that you're going to go from where you are now to what business needs, which is over here, and there's a gap. And being able to understand, one, that there is a gap is the first point. Be able to say, how do I fill that gap? And it's really being inquisitive. It's going up and saying, I don't understand. And I can remember very early on being in meetings and, people are talking a mile a minute, we're going to do this, and it's going to be this, and we have to worry about this and stuff. And you're writing notes furiously because they're clearly understanding it in the moment. And I've got some homework to do. So you spend a lot of time doing sort of background research, preparing, probably more than other people. So you do extra homework. The military has, you come out of the military, the term things like book to bill mean nothing to you. So again, it's like, okay, hold on. What does that mean? Oh, this is what it means. But then how do I apply that into my business? Oh, that's what I apply in business. How do I now bring relevance into a meeting where they're using that term? And those are all sort of the steps to go through to try and put all that together. So it is quite the learning experience, but being humble enough to say, I am going to learn. And the example, I often see is people come out of the military saying, I'm a fabulous leader. And the answer is, so are a lot of people in business. And if you go to some like an Indigo bookstore or something, you go look at the military leadership section, it's this big, and it's fabulous. If you go look at the business leadership section, it's this big, because there are a lot of more people doing it and writing about it. So it's one of the things of saying, recognizing that, yes, you might have been a leader in the military, but there's a lot of leaders in business, and they're very, very good at what they do for the environment they are. You might have been very good at what you do in the environment you were in. Doesn't mean that's the same thing.
No, 100%. One of the important things I wanted to ask you, did you find, so from a psychological standpoint, that you might have went in with somewhat of an advantage? Because, you're going from, like you said, jumping out of airplanes to then all of a sudden sitting into a boardroom, whereas most of those people wouldn't be put into that kind of perspective. Did you find it gave you an edge in terms of maybe, looking at fear and dealing with stress and stuff like that?
So stress, yes. And again, I think there's an interesting analogy there, which is you sort about, the fear, which comes back to sort of courage, right? Courage is doing something even though you're scared witless, effectively. Grossly oversimplified, I get it. And one thing we recognize in the military is you do need courage to overcome certain things. And whether it's, recovering a friend who's under fire, doing certain actions, but it can be a very short time frame, right? It can be minutes, hours, days where you need the courage to perform an action, right? What I see in business is different courage. If you think about the entrepreneur who's leveraging his house, he's mortgaged his house so he can start a business, right? He's got the stress of that, and whether he can pay his family bills next week is an unknown. Whether he will make this work and he can send his kids to college is an unknown. That's also courage, and that can last for months, years, while he gets his business off the ground. So those are sometimes two different things. And it's one thing you recognize in the military is no matter what you do, you're going to get paid. Right. There's that sort of process of, no matter whether I do 6 hours a day or 10 hours a day, I get paid the same. Right. There is a bit of a mentality, and that's government writ large. That's kind of the nature of working in the government. Whereas in the sort of business world, working 6 hours, 10 hours makes a difference because, you're turning the handle to drive revenue, which can then, pay off your mortgage, right? That's a different thing to consider.
Do you find the thing I like to talk about fear, because it hits a lot of aspects of our life. How was it for you, to overcome the fear that you're putting your life on the line every day as a veteran? That's a difficult pill to swallow for most people. Was it just like a job for you? You said, you know what, I'm out here, I'm brave, I'm going, and I'm courageous. How did you overcome that fear? I'm just trying to get inside the psychology behind that.
Yeah, I think it's also stages of life. Most of us, when we're young and in the military, I think you have a neat naivete of being invincible, right? There is that sort of invincibility, going through basic training, all those sort of process, you're trained, that this is something you're going to do, your mission. And it's also muscle reflex. Right. Whether it's shooting, whether it's flying, whatever it is, they're teaching certain reflex actions. So, you go through it. But the military then is sort of also conditioning you to be ready to do that. So it's a whole process designed to enable you to operate under extreme stress conditions. And that's part of this process. And again, in business, we don't necessarily have a process of doing that. We don't have a process of doing that. But again, it's that stuff of saying, but over time, we do condition people. And you see the people who manage that stress. You see the people who can cope with that stress. But you can also self-select. Right? We have people who say, listen, I'm really good at X, and now you want me to become a manager, which means I've got to manage people, I've got to look after people. I don't want to do that. Right? I want to stay here. I want to do what I'm doing now. I don't want the stress of looking after people. That's not something I enjoy. I recognize that impacts my career. I recognize that's going to be different for me, but I still bring value to the organization, just keeping my job. But I know my salary might not do that. It may flatten out. That's okay, right? That's perfectly fine. But in the military, you can't do that and still move up. You cannot, not take that on, right? We have very few people who say, hey, I'm just going to stay here, right? That's not necessarily a well-regarded thing. And again, different in culture. No, right? Different cultures.
I really appreciate that mentality where in the military, you're always trying to strive to grow, teamwork, the discipline aspect. How was that transition for you, becoming a CEO and managing different teams and individuals with different emotions, applying the leadership techniques you learned in the military to now business?
So I think you got, I'd say both teams, again, it's all about team management. It's all about, sort of looking at your people and recognizing what drives them, what motivates them, what they want, and then enabling them. And I think you come back to treating people like adults. Right. If you look at, if you need more than dress appropriate in your dress code, 2 words in your dress code, dress appropriate, you've got the wrong team, right? Because it's simple. And particularly if you look at us as a high-tech company, we have guys who come in shorts and T-shirts, in the summer because it's really hot, and they sit at their desk and code. That's awesome. I don't care. As long as that T-shirt is appropriate, right? It doesn't offend anybody. It doesn't upset anybody. Carry on. If you're meeting a client, that's different. I want you to, you think in your head, I'm going to dress appropriate to meeting a client. It's fairly simple. If you cannot get dress appropriate, you probably shouldn't be there.
Right.
And I think that's where you come back to, which is, look at that sort of leadership and saying, if you want an environment for adults, like you said, leadership, treat people like adults, and giving them a vision saying, this is where we're going, then they can then drive themselves along that path as long as they know where they're going, what their role is to get there, and what the priorities are.
No, 100%. I think that's important too, because especially, do you find being a CEO that one of the most important aspects is you always have your IQ, where you should be sharp individuals, you can manage those, but do you find a big part of being a CEO is being able to read into the emotional side of it, the EQ?
Yeah, I mean, again, you need both, right? If you ultimately look at the role of a CEO, I make, some fairly significant decisions on a daily basis. Not a lot, fairly significant number of decisions on a daily basis, strategic, the decisions on the business, not necessarily in the business, on the business, where we're going, what we're going to do.
Right.
My team below me, my direct reports, make more decisions, sometimes not quite as strategic, but they make more of them. And then, down the stack, that's the way it goes, right? So I have less volume of decisions to make on a daily basis, but they are more impactful to the business.
Right.
And then that stack goes down. But then if you look at the people below you, you're then saying, okay, are you empowered to make your decisions? Do you understand what's going to drive you? And that really comes back to, like you said, is a mixture of EQ and IQ. Looking at the people themselves and what do they want. And, I made a comment the other day is nobody's ever said, thank God for that micromanagement, right? Nobody ever said, thank goodness I'm being micromanaged.
Right.
So, being able to trust your people. And somebody asked me the same thing the other day, and I said, there was nothing worse. I used to work for a large company. You have guys come back in, they've been on holiday for 2 weeks, and you say, oh, how was your holiday? And they grumble and say, oh, it was awful. I had to respond to emails, and people called me, and and I'd say, what's wrong with your team?
Right.
Or why didn't they feel empowered to make decisions on your behalf? Why didn't they feel trusted that it might not be the way you'd quite do it, but it still achieve the outcome and the aim that you had set them? And the answer is they hadn't trusted them. They hadn't empowered them, right? So they'd gone on holiday and said, call me if this happens, email me about this. It's like, well, that's not really a holiday. That's not a break. And I made the point of saying I went away. I did my first ever cruise end of last year with my wife. And I probably had to respond. And it was there was a very specific comment in the line, which meant I knew I had to look at something. And it was actually, they'd sent me a message on instant message saying, look at this email dated this time. I looked at that one email and said, oh yeah, I've got to sign something or whatever. And there was probably 3 in a whole 2-week period. And the rest of it, the team felt empowered to keep going without me. I came back and they had done a marvelous job. And then, I've got the team I need, right? Because, they needed me for a couple of things, but my absence didn't impact business. And is that, there's that old adage of the graveyards are full of people who thought they were essential and their businesses have kept going.
No, 100%. I think that's actually a great point. And one of the things, if we invest in our people, when you're hiring people, you train them properly, you don't have to worry as much, I guess you could say. Do you think, and this is an interesting question, I want to talk to you being a leader yourself. Do you think leaders are born, where you're just born with those innate traits, or are they made? Or is it in conjunction with both, obviously?
I think it's an absolute mixture of both, right? Nature, nurture.
Right.
There's very much you come out with a style and a personality, just by sort of your nature, but that can be developed. It can be grown. And again, go back to sort of military. I remember certain leadership traits were beaten into me at an early age, right? And when you're malleable in that sort of 18 to 22, very malleable sort of person. Right. And, I can remember very clearly joining my first ship and heading up to join this new team. And most of the people who, worked for me were older than me. They knew this was my first ship. This was their second or their third. They'd been in the Navy longer. One, that's terrifying, or should be if you're a junior officer, right? But then it's the stuff of saying, So how do I do this? How do I, be the leader of people who know more about the job than I do? And if you're very, very lucky, and I was, you have a senior, NCO, senior, non-commissioned officer, or somebody who's your 2IC at that stage, and you go and say, hey, this is me. This is dripping wet behind the ears. I recognize that, but I want to do what I can for this team. I want to look after this team. Can you help me understand how that works? And lo and behold, I did. I was very lucky, at that early stage of my career to have some fairly strong sort of personalities around me to help guide me at that stage.
I think that's one of the most important things, is having the right mentors. It's like I was watching a video yesterday, and this one gentleman, he's a multi-billionaire CEO, and he said, his name's Dan Pena. He's like, I can look at your friends, and he's like, I'll know right away where your future's going to end up. It's one of those things. You have the right mentors, people that set those fundamentals. I want to ask you, this is super important. So some of my audience is students and young entrepreneurs, aspiring individuals. What would be some of your advice to them? So for instance, like me and you, we both had a good laugh at TEDx. We both didn't have the highest grade in high school. What would your advice? So I find a lot of the time I've studied it, you see a lot of people are going to university, putting themselves in debt without a plan. Would you recommend that they maybe take a year off? Like, what's your advice to some of these students where they're just trying to figure it out? Should they go to university, or should they maybe follow their passion? Where's the divide? What's your advice to them?
I think it's very interesting. I have teenagers right in that position now, and with a very mixed point. I think you're far too young to know exactly what the game plan will look like. I look at me. I started, even in the military, I changed. Started driving ships, then went flying, and then went into intelligence world. Right, so I had almost career changes within the military as well. I think you're very young to say this is what my plan is. Doesn't mean you can't. Right, and some young people they've got a very good idea of what they want to do. They've studied it. They know where they want to get to. All power to you. Keep going. Right, you have your game plan. Be ready for change. Right, so the game plan might not quite work out, but if you've got that, good for you. If you don't have that, don't rush.
Absolutely.
Right, your ability to go and do academia will never go away. You can go back and do a degree at 30. You can go back and do a degree at 40. It doesn't matter. Right, don't get yourself into debt for something you're not convinced for. And I think that becomes part of saying, we're changing. Again, if you feel you want to take the time off, I think it's also important to find out what you don't like to do.
Right.
Right. That's kind of key. And I think that's why some of the co-op programs, or saying, can I come and spend a week doing X, it is great, because you may have a very, good plan. Like you've watched, I don't know, you want to be a lawyer and you've watched Law and Order, and you think it's going to be great. But really your personality is more for corporate law, right? Because you actually, you like the idea of the cut and thrust, but actually your personality is very much more of being sort of, in the corporate law, looking at the books, like, those sort of pieces. So I think, again, you don't really I think a lot of times is you might have an idea of what you'll enjoy, but it's really hard in this world. And I think the other thing is there are so many things in front of people these days, so many options. If you go back sort of, 100 years, even 50 years, right? Your field of employment was much narrower than it was today. These days, there are so many options in front of people in terms of career path and what you can do, that it's really, really hard to decide. So finding a way to sort of put your toe in the water to find out what you actually like to do or not like to do, I think is critical. And I think the other point is be ready to pivot.
Right.
That's the thing, is you may have a game plan, doesn't mean it's going to pan out. And that's the resiliency. I mean, that's the other thing we talk about, is that sort of mental and emotional resiliency of saying, yeah, I wanted to do X, Y, and Z. I did X, and then either I chose Y or Y didn't choose me. So I'm going to go this way. And, if I look at sort of business, that sort of emotional and mental resilience of being able to adapt, and change, without sort of curling up in the fetal position, I think is really, really important. So, I mean, looking at sort of going back to your point of saying, don't rush into something, take the time to look at it, and it'll be there next year as well. Like if it's right for you, it'll be right for you next year as well. And I know the year sounds a really long time to a lot of people, but, take a little bit of time to process and think and be ready for what you want to do.
I think that's actually an excellent point. It's the same thing. I tell a lot of students, I'm like, you know, if you want to be a lawyer, go sit with a lawyer for a little while, go watch what they're doing, kind of mentor them, and you get a little bit of a feel in the environment. That's the plan. I was going to originally go down, and I seen what they were doing. I'm like, okay, no, like, you see me, I got a lot of, I am not cut out for that kind of thing. What's your best advice to build resiliency? So, you know, the Navy SEAL mentality that you have a governor in your mind, you break through it every single day, you push yourself. What would be some of your advice to people to start really building that mind state, getting that muscle memory, so that when those moments happen, you don't even think, you can just react and pivot?
I think there's a couple of things. One is, you know, having your own sort of knowing yourself, right? What is going to bother me? What is going to affect me? You know, what can I roll through? And we're all different. You know, different things affect people differently. So recognizing, you know, what bothers you, what affects you, right? You know, you said the Navy SEAL, the guy who can, you know, run nonstop along a beach, you know, all day, right, is different from somebody else. But what can affect him, right, may not affect the other person, right? They may be resilient to different aspects of change. It could be family change. It could be, you know, family circumstances change. They can roll through that. Whereas that guy who can just physically, you know, be tough might not have other, you know, coping mechanisms. So that's kind of the first piece. And the second piece for all of us is making sure that you know how to decompress, making sure you know how to take stress on and then recognize, okay, given what I'm dealing with, how am I coping? How am I dealing with it? Because again, otherwise you become this sort of little pressure cooker that explodes. And it could be physical exercise. It could be talking, you know, downloading with friends, talking to friends, in which case you need a friend network, right? Or it could be family, right? You know, it could be, I've got my true life partner, and that's the person I'm going to talk to, who's going to share, who's going to smack you upside the back of the head and say, you know, listen, you can do this, get the hell on with it, right? Stop being a crybaby and move on, right? And the other thing is, you know, I think you come back to sort of that mental resilience of saying, you know, having friends who'll call you out on your shit is kind of important. Of, you know, stop being pathetic, right? And it was funny, I was at a thing the other day, and, you know, somebody was, you know, they got the nice glass of ice water the waitress had brought, and they got the straw, and they had the straw, and they, oh, you know, I don't like these paper straws anymore. So I kind of looked at them and said, try just drinking out of the glass.
Right.
You know, and then you go back to and said, and I, you know, and then I got facetious and said, because you know what, on a daily basis, you know, a teenager, your compatriot living in, you know, Syria, generally doesn't complain about the straw in the iced water, you know, so really not an issue. So again, when you look at some of the issues, is that really as important as you think it is? And again, I think that's what, again, you come back to sort of what military people are good at, is really saying, really, that's what we're going to worry about today. That's the big thing we're going to get stressed out about. Not so much. Again, because they've been there, seen it, and realize really what's important in life and what makes a difference.
No, 100%. That's actually a really great point. One of my last questions I want to ask you, I think this is important, being that you come from a military background. So a lot of the time you see general CEOs, very masculine approach, where they're sitting there and they don't want to show any emotion. They kind of, you know, they have the cement face or the stone face. What's your take on maybe being a little bit vulnerable and showing some of that emotion and maybe be to better relate with people? How do you feel about that in terms of a leadership approach? I mean, a lot of people that they're just straight to the point, very hardcore. They don't show very much emotion.
I think it depends on your team, right? This is my thing about adaptable leadership, right? There are teams where, you know, showing the fact that, yes, this bothers me. I'm annoyed by what you have done. I still like you, but you have annoyed me with what you've been done. It isn't what we agreed upon. So I'm going to give you a hard time and move on. You're allowed to show that emotion.
Right.
But again, if you go down to, you know, other, you know, the big city business mentality of, you know, I will be this stone face, you know, I am going to say we're going to do this, and this, follow that. That might work for some big institutions. But would you want to work there? Right? It could, you know, again, this is that sort of thing saying, what environment do I want? Do I want an, you know, an environment where people relate to me, people ask me about my family, people come in, they talk about their weekend, and, you know, it's actually enjoyable being in that environment? Or do I just want the cold, hard cut and thrust? And we're all different. At different stages, you might want it. I mean, another guy, you know, a friend of mine, you know, will say he did that. He went to Toronto, did the hard cut and thrust, got a bill every day, really driving. And they had to do the life-altering event.
Right.
And realized, yeah, actually, this isn't so important as other things. And he moved back into New Brunswick and, found a role where, he didn't pay as much as Toronto did, but he got to spend a lot of time with his family, he got a better quality of life and the rest of it. And he paid remarkably well, and he's doing extremely well in the role because he likes it. Right. And that's the thing of saying, you can put your, passion into things. And it comes back to sort of personality and passion. What do you feel passionate about? Because if that's, the inner flywheel that's driving you, then that makes a significant difference. Where if it's just cold, hard cut and thrust and you're just chasing the almighty dollar, like ultimately there's no real passion in there. I mean, if you're passionate for almighty dollar, great, power on. But for the majority of us, seeing, me succeed, being able to stay in contact with my family and seeing my team at work succeed, if that's your passion, then, then you've got to find the role where that happens.
No, 100%. That's actually a really great point. This is the last question I want to ask you to close this off. It ties in perfectly. How do you feel about, so in terms of actual fulfillment, going into these jobs and different things, what is the importance of giving back for yourself? So being somebody that's served for over 20 years, now a CEO of a big company, serving again, talk about how that's tied into, overall fulfillment in your life and giving you, a strong purpose.
So yeah, I mean, I do get your point about the service aspect of it. I think, again, that continues if you're always looking, how do I give back? So in my case, working with a couple of veterans organizations, helping more veterans come out. But then, we have other charitable, posters in here. So I think when you have that service mentality, it never really goes away. And you can go into business. You can, there's a number of, very successful, business leaders, who are veterans. And I think at the back of our minds, we still keep the, team spirit and service spirit. So that never really leaves you. And it's finding ways how to do that while, still managing to achieve what you need to with the business. And then that becomes the balance. So yeah, I mean, that component never goes away. And if I look at, for instance, in Martello, we have what we call the employee gift program, where if you're engaged with the program, if you're involved with the program, you can come to Martello and we will donate into that program. But you have to be involved. You can't just donate money.
Right.
And again, that's part of that community environment, is saying, when you are already giving of your time, we will support you in that.
Oh no, I think that's absolutely incredible too. It keeps people engaged, so it's not just, oh, it's thoughtless, here, let's just give you, however much money. I think you've done an incredible job in your career. Honestly, I find it interesting to see the transition, because you don't really see that. You start to see it a little bit more in our culture where, some of these Navy SEALs are coming out training different companies. The last question I'm going to ask you, John, before we close this off, what can we expect next from you? Being so you've already accomplished so many different things. I asked Ellie Fadley last time I interviewed him, is there going to be a book coming out telling your story? What are you looking to do as you continue on?
I think for me, it's a focus on Martello, right? We're in scale up mode. There's an awful lot of work to be done. That's not going away anytime soon. Focus on, from a business perspective, focusing on that. And then, again, some side, pieces, veteran employment pieces, some other things where I can give my time. So really, I think that's enough at the moment. And then, of course, we'll spend time with family, right? That's kind of the process as well. So balancing all those pieces is kind of key. But really, for me, no, I think I've got more than enough on my plate at the moment to go forward.
Honestly, I got to say, I think you've done a great job. And I want to let everybody know here that's going to be watching this interview, one of the most important points John made in his TED Talk was that we should be hiring more veterans. These guys are disciplined, they're task orientated. That's one of the things, as I scale up my company, I really want to be able to implement that just because of you. That was a huge point when you closed off. I want to say thank you very much for coming on the show, and I'm going to make sure we put this out in front of everybody. You're a great leader, John, and thank you very much.
Great. Thanks, Connor.
Oh, anytime.